Hello everyone, my name is Lauren Davis and I'm in the NURS.802 class. This is my submission for discussion board 1 about the theories of nursing. So when I first read the assignment, I was thinking of clinical practice as being in the clinical practice of the hospital in an inpatient setting. And my mind just kept going back to a setting that's a little different than that. I was a school health nurse for about a year and a half, and I was in a couple of the schools in the county that were pretty impoverished and had some difficult student populations to deal with. Because I was in a couple different schools, I had about 500 children a day that I was responsible for, which was quite a large task. But there's 2 children that kept coming into my office daily, and it was for different things, usually not an illness. They never wanted to call home and they never wanted to go home. But I encountered them as a clinical nurse in multiple different ways and different days, and it was always a different request. I need something to drink. I need something to eat. I just wanted to go walk around. But it was rarely that they needed something medical. If we're going to be honest, and I'm going to be transparent, it was pretty frustrating to encounter that because there was a lot of responsibility as a school nurse. We were also coming through COVID, which made things a lot worse and a lot more difficult. But they were in there pretty much daily. One of the 2 sisters, they were in 2 different grades, so 2 different ages, and their requests were always vastly different. There were behavior issues involved as well, so that kind of made the complexities a little more. Some days they would be sick and we would need to go do things like strep test or send them home, but most days it was not an issue. Later, much later in our time with them, I discovered that they actually were in a pretty terrible home situation. They had been in the custody of the state of North Carolina, and they were with a kinship placement that was not good. It was a grandmother and a grandfather who mistreated them. And once we started to pull back the layers of that and figure out that, everything kind of started making sense. Unfortunately, this was towards the end of our time together, and so I didn't have a lot of time left with the girls by this point. As I was reading these theories and the theorists and the chapters, my mind just kept going back to this situation in this elementary school. And I kept thinking about what that would have looked like had I used these theories that I have learned about this week. So I think that the theories that relate best to these are Dossie and Watson. So let's start with Barbara. So when we look at the theory of integral nursing and what that looks like, it doesn't really ever refer to the school nurse specialty directly. There's actually an article that I have referenced that relates school nursing to the integral theory of nursing and how that should work well together. Specifically, it does say in the school nurse environment, if the theory of integral nursing is used, that relationships can be built and that healing can begin even with a nurse that is not very familiar with the student in the situation, that they can start to grow that relationship. I do want to reference a part in the book on page 55 that spoke volumes to me. It said that there is actually interventions that are most used in the theory of integral nursing. And looking back, hindsight on what happened with me and the girls, I feel like maybe I did use some of these towards the end. But my mind goes back to what could have been had these been used more often and from the start. Some of these in particular that I appreciate are the affirmations, the deep listening, and the intention. And I think that that's why the girls kept coming back. I didn't know that then, but I know that now. And I feel like that's why they kept coming back, because unknowingly I was providing affirmations and having intentional, and I was listening. I was listening to what they had to say, even if some days it was tough to do that. And so the theory of integral nursing and those interventions that are used, I think would speak volumes in a situation where a parent is not involved and not present. This taught me that if we just listen and take time to to be and to sit in the silence, that sometimes that is more instrumental than providing a solution, because I am a solution-based nurse and I like to provide solutions. The second theory that I'd like to talk about is Watson's. Gene Watson's theory of healing is something I think that we all need, especially nurses with trauma and burnout and the things that we experience. But I see it a lot in those two little girls and the healing that they need, that they still need, and that they needed then. There is an article that was published that I referenced, and it specifically speaks to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when you think of diversity and equity and inclusion, you often think of minority populations, but these girls are minority populations, and they're the underserved populations. And it specifically states to be aware of any assumptions that you may have and separate your own beliefs. Because if you do not, that will block your ability to use the human caring potential and the theory of caring. Those are things that I can identify right now that I did poorly then, that I did not block out my assumptions, and I assumed that those girls were just had bad behaviors and they didn't want to be involved in what they were doing that day. And so if I had pulled those assumptions away, I would have been able to introduce a healing environment for them that they needed. Another thing that our book references is making sure that we make the people that we're dealing with human. I think it's really easy. It was easy for me in this situation to not view them as humans with needs and emotions and problems outside of school, because it's very easy to become task oriented. So I think that including them and making them human and looking at things like preference and their lifestyle and their choices and their home and their family, when we pull those things in, it says here in the book that we can make them human, and that makes the theory, Watson's theory of human caring, much easier when we really associate that there's a person involved and not just a situation. These are things that I feel like I could change and that I could do better. And I luckily still have a relationship with one of these two sisters, and I get to speak into her life. And I am going to start using these theories that I have learned. Thank you so much for your time.